Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I'm going to get started in a few minutes. I just want to give people time to tune in to this particular hangout. And I'm going to talk about a couple of situations involving white supremacists. So I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes for people to tune in so that I can do this hangout. Shout out to everyone that's watching. Peace and blessings to each and every one of you. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you receive notification as soon as I post new content here on YouTube. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So just bear with me 1 second. Just bear with me a second. All right, so this man by the name of James Alex Field Jr. was convicted of killing a woman and injuring dozens of people. And this incident took place during that hate rally in Charlottesville, Virginia that took place last year. And this man has been convicted of murder, first-degree murder. He's been convicted of 5 counts of aggravated malicious wounding and 3 counts of malicious wounding. So this man was recently sentenced by a jury to life in prison plus 119 years for these crimes. In addition, the jury recommended that he pay fines totaling $480,000. Now, he's scheduled to have the formal sentencing on March 29th. You know, at that sentencing, the judge can either concur with the jury's recommendation or the judge can impose a lesser sentence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours over 2 days, and they reached this decision. And you will recall what happened. You know, there was this rally, this hate rally, where you had all these white supremacist groups come to Charlottesville, Virginia. And the reason why they were protesting is because there was talk of removing Confederate statues from that area, and they wanted to defend those statues. And we know what those statues represent. They represent slavery. You know, those people, those Confederates actually went to war against their own countrymen in order to preserve their right to own Black people, to enslave Black people, to beat Black people, to rape Black people. And as far as they are concerned, they are proud of those Confederates that fought to preserve slavery, that fought to preserve the oppression of Black people. So they had this demonstration. You know, in their minds, they were defending their heritage. You know, they were protecting history and stuff like that. So you had all these white supremacist groups there in Charlottesville protesting. And this man was one of the people among the crowd. Here's an image of him, you know, at the hate rally. You know, here's another image of him as well at that rally. Yeah, so this guy attended the rally. He was in his car. He stopped his car, you know, and in the street there were protesters, counter protesters. So you had these hate mongers, but you also had counter protesters, you know, protesting against racism. You know, you had people demonstrating against the bigotry and the racism of these hate groups. And there were a group of people protesting in the street, and this guy actually backed up his car. He stopped his car, backed it up, and sped up into a crowd of people, killing one person And her name is Heather Heyer, and this is her image right here. She was killed by this man, and he was convicted of first-degree murder for killing her. Plus, he injured several other people in the crowd. You know, people suffered serious injuries. And what I want to do is scroll to the segments in this particular article from the Washington Post that talks about some of the injuries that people endured. And the name of this rally was the Unite the Right rally. It took place in August of 2017. And let's see, I'm going to get to the section where they talk about some of the injuries. You know, this article talks about how several of the injured victims testified during the trial, and they described lasting physical wounds, psychological anguish, and dire financial distress. You know, they spoke of shattered bones, debilitating nerve damage, which they may not ever fully recover from. They talked about like suffering from nightmares and social isolation caused by post-traumatic stress disorder, crushing medical bills from surgeries that depleted their insurance and can burden them into the future. So let me see if there's some other just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so that's a summary of some of the injuries that people suffered and, you know, the impact that this had on them. And we know like what usually happens in these types of cases when you have white men that commit these types of acts of violence, you know, the first thing they want to do is talk about how they suffer from mental health issues. And they try to say, well, it is not terrorism. You know, this man's just suffered from some health issues. He was some loner and stuff like that. So they try to make excuses for these people that commit terrorism, and they are reluctant to actually call this what it is, which is terrorism. You know, so this man killed this woman and injured all these other people. And, you know, not only does he face this sentence right here that I mentioned, you know, life plus 119 years, he also faces a federal trial as well. So this is not the end of it. And, you know, I want to close out with a couple of comments before I go to your comments in the chat room. You know, one thing that's important to realize is that this is not final. You know, this recommendation of the jury is not final. Again, the judge may enter a lesser sentence. So, you know, people need to be vigilant. We need to continue to monitor this case. You know, it is great that there is some semblance of justice, that this man was found guilty of first-degree murder, was found guilty of malicious wounding and aggravated malicious wounding. So that is a positive development, you know, and this is just yet another reminder, as you will see in this next story that I'm going to talk about, of how these white supremacists in this country actually pose the greatest threat to the American people. They are a greater threat, as many studies pointed out, than, you know, foreign-based terrorist groups, than, you know, this so-called Islamic extremists. They are a greater threat than them, you know, in terms of all the acts of violence that these people have committed over the years. And it's just a shame that we have a federal government under this Donald Trump that doesn't view these white supremacists as a priority. He took funding away from investigating these types of groups. Now, I want to go back to this woman right here who was killed during this incident. You know, often I hear a lot of people here on YouTube, you know, constantly quote, you know, certain scholars and try to say, well, you know, Black people have no friends, Black people have no allies, you know, and a lot of these people basically suggest that all white people are evil and, you know, can't be trusted and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, throughout history, throughout our history in America, there have been progressive white people who have literally sacrificed their lives to fight against racism. And, you know, I think that we have to acknowledge that we need to move away from, you know, embracing the same kind of bigotry that we condemn. You know, you have this woman right here who literally gave her life fighting against racism and white supremacy. And, you know, there are plenty of examples of this, you know, examples during the civil rights movement where, you know, for instance, you had those 2 civil rights workers killed in Mississippi, plus a brother was killed as well. But you had 2 white civil rights workers killed, and other examples of white people who were killed fighting for civil rights. And you have examples of white people who regularly are litigating civil rights cases all the time involving discrimination against Black people. So, you know, I just think that we need to move away from these generalizations and move away from the same kind of prejudice that we condemn when it comes from the mouths of white people. So let me go to your comments before I sign out. And I will be doing a couple of other hangouts right after this, because I think it's easier this way for people to actually watch these hangouts. Because if you do a long hangout, you know, a lot of people are not going to tune in for the entire hangout, and they're not going to wait around to get to this, you know, the segment that's relevant to them or the subject that they are most interested in. So I'm going to be breaking these up into short little hangouts. So yeah, shout out to Sister. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Ahmed. You know, peace and blessings to you. Shout out to Jay Smooth. Shout out to Bonafide 1970. And there's a couple of other stories that I'm going to address, like in this particular hangout as well, to deal with white supremacy. So hang in there. You know, there's a couple of other things that I'm going to talk about. And then after that, I'm going to go into my next couple of separate hangouts. So again, shout out to Bonafide 1970. Thanks for tuning in. I'll even shout out Ross Cannon. So you said I turned my back on the Black sector. On the so-called Black sector, I don't talk about those people, you know, and their buffoonery and stuff like that. On this channel, I talk about serious content. And even on my I Declare War channel, I'm talking about serious political content. You know, I don't have time to like participate in the buffoonery and straight up coonery that takes place in the so-called Black sector, where you have grown-ass men arguing and fighting with each other and bickering with each other over nonsense, wasting all their time talking about a whole bunch of irrelevant people that don't really matter in the big scheme of things. So yeah, I've been left that sector, you know, like years ago. You know, I haven't done videos for the most part talking about them or even addressing them. And, you know, it's only a few people over there that I watch regularly. But I'm going to move back on to the main subject. Yeah, a lot of these people that commit these acts of terrorism, that's what they are, acts of terrorism. They are, in fact, like devilish type of people. Anybody that rams their car into a crowd of innocent people, there's something wrong with that. And then that reminds me of how Donald Trump described these people. He referred to these people as some very fine people. He talked about how, you know, there were good people on both sides. Even though on the white supremacist side, you have people shooting into crowds. You have hate mongers, racists, and bigots defending racist symbols, defending the symbols of slavery, defending the symbols of the oppression of Black people. So these were not some very fine people. And it speaks volumes that this president of ours, you know, Donald Trump, actually co-signed this stuff. And it took him a while to finally come out and speak out against these white supremacists and stuff. You know, this is a man who tried to pretend like he didn't know who David Duke was. You know, this is a man who hesitated when it came to renouncing David Duke. So yeah, I mean, this is very serious, man. And as you will see in these next couple of stories, you know, this is not an isolated incident. You know, first of all, we saw what happened at that Kroger store where you had a white supremacist just shoot 2 random Black people. You saw what happened with Dylan Roof when he went into that Black church. And while people were praying, this man proceeded to prey upon them by firing shots at them, killing 9 innocent Black people in a church. Then you had the situation where a white supremacist went in a synagogue and killed a whole bunch of Jewish worshipers. You know, some Jews that were in their synagogue, you know, a place of worship. Um, and, you know, again, that's another reminder of the links between, you know, these racist white supremacists, you know, in terms of their racism against Black people and their anti-Semitism. And that's why I find it like really troubling when you have so-called pro-Black people embracing anti-Semitism, when anti-Semitism is nothing but a branch of white supremacist ideology. So let me see what other people are saying before I move on to these next couple of stories. Shout out to Love Wisdom, peace and blessings to you. Shout out to Water Sniper. Yeah, shout out to Dave Bowman. Peace and blessings to all of you. So yeah, I'm gonna get into these next couple of stories before I sign out. Just bear with me 1 second. All right, so you all know that I did a live stream where I briefly mentioned this story right here, you know, about this white supremacist at Columbia University who went on a racist rant. And, you know, I touched on it, and now this guy is saying that he's not a white supremacist and this and that, but I'm going to get into some of the things that he said, and then I'm going to provide my commentary. This is the guy right here, and I'm going to highlight his name and pull up a bigger image so you can see who we're talking about. Because these people need to be shamed, man. These people that are white supremacists, they need to be called out and shamed for what they do. So just bear with me a second. I'm going to pull this up by, you know, putting it on in Google, pull up his image. So this is the person we're talking about. Now, this kid, you know, he's an adult, you know, for the most part. Like, he's going to Columbia, you know, which is an Ivy League school located in New York City, you know, a city that's very diverse. And this guy said that he was upset because of the overuse of the issue of white privilege, you know, so he went on this tirade because of that. That's what he claims. You know, this man said that Europeans built the modern world. He said, we invented science and industry. And he said, white people are the best thing that happened to the world. We did everything. This is what he's saying about white people to a group of Black people and other minorities, from what I understand. You know, and he was widely condemned for this statement. A lot of people called him a racist, and rightfully so. They called him a white supremacist and et cetera. And then in response to that, you know, this guy says this. He says, I'm not a white supremacist or a racist, nor do I subscribe to any views that support that ideology. I unequivocally denounce all groups that support racism. My reaction that evening grew out of my distaste for the overuse of the term white privilege and similar divisive rhetoric as a means of dismissing views of others. And yeah, so I'm going to just comment on this briefly. You know, first of all, like, a lot of times, you know, that's the first thing that racists say. You know, the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm not a racist. You know, that's the main thing that they say. Because, you know, in this society, because of all the work, you know, because of the civil rights movement, because of the social justice movement, and because of the culture of political correctness, you have a lot of these people that are reluctant to really embrace or like verbalize what they truly believe, like admit what they believe. You know, they realize that there's shame around being labeled as a racist or white supremacist. So the first thing that they do is say that they're not racist. You know, I've seen situations where you had companies that blatantly practice racism, you know, who blatantly were discriminating against African Americans. And in all these situations, in every single situation where I have sat down and met with these racist companies, each time they said that they were not racist. Each time they had to cook up some kind of excuse to justify what they do. And this is just yet another example. This man is clearly a racist. You know, he believes that the world basically revolves around white people and that white people are the best thing that happened to the world. Saying that white people are the best thing that happened to the world, that's no different from blatantly saying that white people are superior to other races of people. And obviously, I take issue with any assertion that white people are the best thing that happened to the world for obvious reasons. You know, they enslaved our ancestors for hundreds of years. You know, they obviously weren't the best thing in the world to our African ancestors who were enslaved in this country for hundreds of years. They weren't the best thing in the world to our ancestors that were taken and put in slave ships, you know, forced to be packed like sardines and wallow in their own filth. These people weren't the best thing that happened to the world, enslaving our ancestors for all those years. And, you know, hundreds of thousands of Africans died during the Middle Passage. How in the hell does that make white people the best thing in the world? You know, black people being whipped and beaten and raped and, you know, castrated and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't sound like the behavior of the best thing in the world. You know, all those years of Jim Crow, where black people were segregated and humiliated. But yet this white guy has the audacity to say that white people are the best thing that happened to the world. When we look at what happened to the Native American people, victims of genocide, you know, whole nations of Native people wiped out, millions of Native people wiped out, not only from gunfire, but from biological warfare that these people waged against the Native people, you know, deliberately infecting them with smallpox, killing them. That doesn't sound like these Europeans were the best thing that happened to the world. When you look at the legacy of imperialism and colonialism, where they plundered the world of its resources, plundered Africa, plundered Asia, plundered the Americas, you know, the greatest thieves on the planet Earth. You can't describe such a people as the best thing that happened to the world. You know, when you look at what happened in the Congo and other parts of Africa, how these slave masters and, you know, colonialists not only killed many black people, but they literally cut off black people's limbs, killed more people than that died during the Holocaust in Germany. You can't describe such a people as the best thing that happened to the world. You know, these people dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, killing hundreds of, you know, over 100,000 people. You can't call these people the best thing that happened to the world in light of that, in light of the destruction that they have wreaked upon the environment, you know, destroying the environment, destroying various types of wildlife, you know, rendering various wildlife into extinction. You can't call these people the best thing that happened to the world. And, you know, this idea that, you know, these people invented science and industry is it ignores the reality that the basis of all science and, you know, all human civilization comes from Africa. You wouldn't have mathematics if it wasn't for Africa. You wouldn't have medicine if it wasn't for Africa. You wouldn't have any other basis for any civilization if it wasn't for Africa, because Africa is the cradle of civilization. And many of these modern day inventions that we see and experience, a lot of them have you know, are a result of the work of black people as well. Black people and other races of people have contributed to a lot of these major inventions that we see. As, you know, Brother Psycho was talking about during our last hangout, where, you know, he joined the hangout. You know, a lot of times you had situations where white people literally stole technology from other people and, you know, got patents for it and reaped all the financial benefits of those particular inventions. And I think that for Black History Month, I'm going to really dig into this issue of, the various technological inventions that Black people are responsible for, because a lot of us are ignorant of that. Like, often when it comes to Black history, we're taught about like mainly the civil rights workers and and all that kind of stuff, but we're not taught about the technological advances and inventions that our people are responsible for. So I may focus on that, because we get a lot of focus on entertainers and athletes and all that kind of stuff, but we have great minds in the Black community, great minds that have accomplished great things. So yeah, look out for that in February, man. But this is just outrageous, man. And it's just despicable. At least these straight up white supremacists acknowledge that they're white supremacists, but you have these others who embrace white supremacist ideology, but they want to pretend like they are not white supremacists. And I think that that's the case with a lot of white people. A lot of white people, they can point their finger at the people that wear the hoods, at the people that wear the swastikas, and say that those are the bad guys. When the fact of the matter is, many of these people that don't outwardly and directly embrace that kind of ideology, they embrace it on a subliminal level, man. They accept this false notion that somehow their culture is superior to non-white culture, non-white people, and Black people in particular. So yeah, I'm going to check in and see what you all are saying before I move to this final segment of this particular hangout. And I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Yeah, and that's a good point, Bonafide. Like, Columbia is located in a Black community. It's located in Harlem. Now, Harlem is going through gentrification like many places around the country. But yeah, here you have a white student in a Black community talking about how white people are better, basically saying white people are better. They're the best thing that ever happened to civilization. It's just outrageous, man. Yeah, and Donald Trump is definitely a racist. I agree with that, Ahmed. And I've done plenty of videos, and it baffles me that you have these delusional, misguided, uneducated Negroes that actually support Donald Trump, man. Excuse me. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to this next segment. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so I saw this particular story on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. Someone posted it on my Facebook page. And basically it points out like how shortly after James Alex Fields was sentenced, you have these people arrested and charged with various crimes, charged with assault and malicious harassment based on race. Allegedly, what these men did, like, they attacked a Black DJ at this bar called the Rec Room. And, so they were arrested and they faced these charges. And again, this is just a wake-up call, man. It's just a reminder of, just how this issue of white supremacists is a very important issue, man. It's something that needs to be prioritized by our government, and as I pointed out, this Trump administration has not viewed this as a priority. In fact, he's basically pandered to these types of groups. And, this article talks about how this man by the name of Travis Kander, who's a member of this racist group called Birthright, and he's the head of a hate music record label called American Defense Records. him and like 8 other people were arrested at a bar in Linwood, Washington, for attacking a black DJ, as I mentioned before. And while they were attacking this DJ, they were shouting racial slurs. And this article points out how this attack happened on Martyrs Day, which marks the death of Robert J. Matthews, a white supremacist who led a terrorist group called the Order back in the mid-'80s. And that particular group committed a whole series of crimes. Just bear with me one second. Yeah, so they went on a terror spree, as pointed out here. They had a counterfeiting operation. They committed numerous armed robberies and netted millions of dollars, as pointed out in this article. Members of the group murdered a Jewish radio talk host, you know, because this particular host would challenge white supremacists and racism. Yeah, so that's a recent development, and you know, I'll continue to follow this particular case. And it also mentions that several other people were charged. You know, it has the names listed here. A link to this particular article will be in the description box so that you can check it out for yourself. But as things come out with this case, as you know, the trial takes place, you know, I will follow it and keep you all updated. All right, so let me see what people are saying before I sign out. Yeah, so I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Again, I'm going to be back up here with at least 2 other hangouts, you know, brief little hangouts, talking about a couple of other subjects. So I want to thank you. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content. I appreciate your support. Much respect. Peace.